Welcome to Gapology Radio Podcast with authors Mark Tienes and Brian Brockhoff. We can be reached at gapology.org, and our books can be found at amazon.com.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Gapology Radio. This is your podcast on Gapology, IMBAR, and more. Let's give Mark Tienes a call and see what he's up to. Hey Mark, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. What's going on?
Oh, just working on a number of changes.
Awesome. That almost sounds like it'd be a cool topic for tonight.
Well, let's do that then.
Okay. We always surprise everybody, you know.
Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
So, every leader I talk to is dealing with significant change. And I believe that change is really more frequent than ever before. And there's so many different change initiatives and change processes that are going on. And most leaders are not well equipped for change.
Right.
They may think they are, but they actually don't react to it effectively, don't understand it, don't get ahead of it. So I'd really like to jump into that. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. It is definitely needed. I think, preparing for change on a large scale is important, but even the small changes, I think a lot of people really react differently to it, and a lot of times leaders aren't ready for it.
Yeah. So let's jump in. So we wrote about the process of change, which we call DABA, for those of you taking notes, DABA, and I'll get into the details of that in a minute, but we wrote about that in Gapology. But I would tell you that the first step that all leaders need to consider and need to carefully craft is how you communicate change. Communicate the change that's coming to your team. So we did a podcast on this, but write down these three things because they're really, really critical. So if a change is coming and you're the one communicating it, the first thing you do is you tell the team what they need to know. So you lay out the details of the change, the nuts and bolts, let's say. Secondly, then, you tell them why it matters, why the change matters, why it's significant. And then thirdly, and lastly, you tell them what they need to do. And what this does is it creates action around the change that's coming. And it creates a context that moves the team forward. And it is absolutely critical because I would tell you the biggest mistake made around changes is not effectively and clearly communicating the change, making the assumption, they understand it, they get what's going on. That's not the case. And change is scary to people. And if you don't communicate it clearly, it makes it worse. What do you think, Brian?
Oh, absolutely. And I think you can almost look at especially the bottom part of the habit ladder. So communication and then understanding and then agreement. I think when you're doing that communication up front, ensuring that all those pieces take place, I think a lot of leaders wait until the last minute to communicate change, but people need time to understand it. They need time to process it and come to grips with it.
Yeah, they're thinking, what does this mean for me? And so you're spot on there, Brian. That was great. So let's jump into DABA, D-A-B-A. So those letters stand for denial, which is the first step of change, and I'll get into that in a moment. The second step is anger, and it's very real. The third step is bargaining, and the final step is acceptance. So let's talk through those four steps, starting with denial. So denial is something that a leader needs to see in the team and needs to help guide them forward. So denial is very common. Leaders don't want to take offense to it. It's sort of human behavior. We're hardwired to go into denial. And it sounds something like, oh, this can't be happening, or, oh, no, this won't last, or this won't work. Sometimes the members of the team that will embrace the change the most and be best at it will have been in denial prior to that. It's just how it is. It's human behavior. So as a leader, you need to look for the phases of change in your team. They do go in sequential order, and denial comes first. And you need to help guide them down the path of DABA. And by being able to see it, by knowing that it exists, you can really help your team move forward, embrace change, and quickly move to action. So that's denial. What are your thoughts around that one, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of you may have heard this, when you're looking at grief and understanding grief, and a lot of these things are kind of connected. The denial piece, I found sometimes it's very short-lived on the surface, but occasionally that does hover underneath the surface a little bit. And as a leader, I think it's important to look at it as a warning sign of really the next step. So you can really get ahead of the next step if you react accordingly.
Yeah, no, that's great. But yeah, denial will lead often to the next step, which is anger. And people just get angry over change. It sounds like, why now? Why are we doing this now?
Mm-hmm.
I get so much on my plate. Why me? I mean, why would I have to deal with this? It's very real. So change affects people, and they go from denial to anger. And the good news is, if they're angry, you may actually be witnessing progress, because that means they're moving from denial to anger. And often that means they're moving then on to bargaining and acceptance. The bad news is that there's a wall. So denial and anger are separated from bargaining and acceptance by a wall, a very real wall. So some people never move past denial and anger. They start to just spin in that area and never accept the change that is coming. But again, as a leader, you need to listen, you need to observe, you need to know the process of change, and by doing so, you can help your team leap over that wall. But the wall is very real. So anger is actually progress. And again, rather than reacting to the anger, the best method for a leader, at least initially, is just to listen. Listen and listen. And you can speak to how you jumped over the wall, but listening is often something that will help the team move over the wall fairly quickly. So don't be shocked by anger. It's very real, and it is an actual response to change that happens. So, Brian, talk to me before I go on the other side of the wall here.
Yeah. I think the anger piece. This is really where preparation, I think, helps. So as you're preparing to deliver the message of change, I would have contingency plans in place, have support people if necessary, but at least be prepared as a leader to address the anger piece. I think that would help, at least the communication, because like you said, I thought was really good, is that listening piece. Leaders need to listen more than they speak, especially when you're dealing with anger and high emotional periods of time, and people who are going through that kind of emotional roller coaster. I think, asking questions and just listening to people, giving them the time to get through that emotional roller coaster really helps.
Yeah, so if you go back to what I said earlier, which is you've got to communicate the change clearly. If you do that well, you can get a lot of people over the wall, and you can move them past denial and anger quickly. Again, the 3 steps there are: you're going to tell them what they need to know. You're going to talk about the change. You're going to tell them why it matters. You're going to sell them on the change. And then you're going to tell them what they need to do. You're going to create action. If you do those well, you can often move past the denial and anger phase quickly. So bargaining is the third step in the process of change. And it's big progress because it's on the other side of the wall. It means that they have moved past anger. So bargaining sounds like, well, what if we just do it this way?
Yeah.
Or have you guys thought about
Yeah.
this? Or it's big progress, so just let it go. Listen, take notes. It's great. It's great. What you as a leader do is just come back what they need to do. Come back with that. Come back with, here's what I need from you. And you can move them past bargaining. Once they get to bargaining, you're almost home, because acceptance is the next step. So any thoughts on the wall or on bargaining, Brian?
Yeah, I think the bargaining piece is really an important step, and it is that sign that they move past the wall. So as a leader, I think really just listening and just empathizing with them, because as they're starting to share additional ideas and things like that, look for common ground, because you can position your statements, your responses accordingly based on that common ground.
Yeah, the common ground might be, though, hey, thanks, Brian, we considered that, but we chose this alternative because.
Yes.
And
Yep.
you often have to come back, with something that's a bit more hard line, because often the change is not optional.
Right.
It is, and it's quite different. It's moving forward. So you've got to be careful there as a leader about how you empathize and make sure that you don't overdo it, because we are moving. And by the way, it's effective tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. So the reality of the change is going to set in there.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So the final step is acceptance. So congratulations when you move the team there. Let me tell you, though, and write this down, the number one way to move the team to acceptance is your own acceptance of the change and your own description of the pathway that you went through, how you were in denial, how you were angry, how you bargained, but how you gained acceptance. And once you talk about that, the team will move to acceptance at an incredible rate, and they are over the wall, and generally you can get them all in. But again, if you don't know about these steps, it just creates chaos in your life. It is so predictable. I've been amazed at how predictable the reaction to change has been once I knew DABA. It was like, oh my God, yeah, they're in denial. Oh, there's the anger piece. Oh, there's bargaining. Oh, thank you. There is acceptance. How great is that? It really happens. It's really human behavior, and it's very, very predictable. Other thoughts, Brian?
Yeah, as you were going through that, I was just thinking about, how does this really link with the commitment ladder? If you look at it, denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance, it kind of fits in with the commitment ladder, don't you think?
Well, so what Brian is doing, he's trying to get you to listen to two other podcasts.
Yeah.
He mentioned earlier the habit ladder. Yes, you need to go back and refresh yourself on that one. Mm-hmm. And then the commitment ladder is another great podcast that you need to refresh yourself on. But yeah, it all ties together.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And it is all in a book called Gapology, which we're thrilled has swept the world and has made an impact in the lives of many leaders. So
right, for sure.
We're thrilled by that. That's all I've got, Brian.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great, Mark. This was a good one.
All right. Thanks for your time, everybody.
Thanks. We'll talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, that'll do it from here. Head on over to our website, gapology.org, for more information. Everybody have a fantastic week. We'll talk to you soon.
This has been a Gapology production. Visit us at gapology.org.